back to school, homeschool, and remote learning. Our new topic is our Shakespeare topic for this year, and I'm going to be leading you through Richard III, which is a history play, but it's quite gory, full of murders, full of kind of treachery and kind of treason, and there's a really good bad guy in this play. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. And as we'll find out today, there's another reason for doing this particular Shakespeare play over all the other ones that we could have chosen. So let's get started. Lesson. And today are, first of all, number one, to know why we're studying Richard III, and secondly, to know the basics of Richard III's kind of history and the story. Okay, so two things: one, why we're doing it, and secondly, like, what is it about? Why are we studying Richard III? Well, this information here is just to give you a bit of background. Who was this particular king? Well, these are the details that you need to make sure you got some notes on. You don't take all the notes down from this information, just kind of get the basics or the essentials that you need, as much as you need. If you want to find more out about Richard III after the lesson, you're more than welcome to if you've got time. So Richard III and his dates are 1452, that's his birth date, and 1485 was when he died. And he was King of England from 1483 until his death in 1485 at the Battle of Bosworth Field. And as you'll notice those dates there, his reign was quite short, just the 2 years, probably less than 2 years, really. He was what he's kind of known for in history is that he's a series of lasts. He's the last kings of various things. So he was the last king of the House of York, which was a particular group of like a family branch of the Plantagenet dynasty. So we'll find out a little bit about that today. His defeat at Bosworth is the last decisive battle in the War of the Roses conflict, which is a civil war. And it was also, historically, in terms of historical periods, seen as the end of the Middle Ages. He's also the last English king to die in battle. So since Richard III, no other English ruler, king or queen has actually died on the battlefield. There have been wars, obviously, but he was the last king to die fighting, which is, quite an interesting detail as well. And most recently, is what kind of really brings Richard III back into kind of the public domain was when his body was found. So his remains were discovered under a Leicester car park in 2012. So that's when he kind of re-emerged, as it were, literally into the kind of the ideas of the country. Now, on the side here, I've got some illustrations. So that kind of shows you where Leicester is, pretty much in the Midlands, near Birmingham. You can see here a map, an aerial view of Leicester Cathedral, and this is the car park area that was dug up, and under that car park was found this skeleton. Now, what is cool about this skeleton, in my opinion, is this bit here. If you look at Richard III's spine, it's not straight. It was very curved, and that led to all kinds of other physical conditions that he had. So when he was standing upright, it would have meant that this shoulder here would have been lower. His left, so he'd have had like a lean like this, and his head would have been tilted down. So he might have almost had like the curved spine would have led to his whole body being in a different angle to a normal developed skeleton. He had various nicknames said against him because of his physical deformation. So one of the ideas was that he had a hunchback as well, and in those days, the 1400s, someone with kind of physical disabilities like this would have been treated with suspicion, as they would have believed that God or the devil was somehow involved in this kind of punishment or this disfigurement. So either the body's been punished by God, or the devil's been involved in it somehow. So it kind of gave Richard a very difficult start in life. Although he's in a royal family, his physical kind of appearance would have meant that he was treated quite badly all throughout his life, and certainly in the play, he does get a bit of a bad deal because of his physical appearance. I know you'll agree with me there. But the real reason I love teaching Richard III is to do what I'm going to share with you now. So this is a bit before the play. So the play is all pretty much based, as you'd imagine, down south in London and in the kind of the centre of English power. But before he was King of England, uh, he had another job, and his job title was the Duke of Gloucester. Okay, so quite a prestigious title. And in this role of Duke of Gloucester, he was very much a supporter of his brother, who was King Edward IV. And he helped his brother by having the responsibility for the north of England. So Richard was basically, in one for a lesser term, King of the North, as it were. And his actual title was the Sheriff of Cumberland. And he was basically gifted Penrith. So he was like the landowner. He owned Penrith. And this is why I find him really interesting for our point of view, being in Penrith, because he is, our king, as it were. He's got a real connection with the town. And what he did for Penrith was, we can still see it every day in our town centre. So he basically uh, he modified a house that existed that had been built in the 15th century, so in the 1400s, and he basically modified that and built what we now know as Penrith Castle. And as you can see, it's in ruins now, but it's still pretty much, you can get a sense of the scale of the building that Richard built if you go and visit that area. Um, and while the castle was being built, while he was renovating the house and turning it into a very luxurious place for him to stay, he spent time at Dockeray Hall, which is this pub near the bandstand in town. And if you go into that pub, there's various indicators that Richard stayed there, because there's some artwork on the walls and some carvings and so on, that would indicate that he'd been in that particular building for some time. So it was called the Gloucester Arms for a while. And you can actually, if you look at the building from the outside, you can see uh, this kind of um, boar, or like a wild pig kind of image above the doorway, and that was Richard's kind of logo that he would have on his shield or on his kind of flags. So the wild boar was his kind of heraldic animal. And what he was doing here, his job in Penrith, was basically to protect the rest of England from Scottish invasion. The Scots north of Hadrian's Wall were constantly raiding into the northern parts of England, um, and sometimes quite successfully claiming huge areas of land as Scotland. So Richard's role while he was in Penrith was to kind of supervise and lead the security of this area, not to try and actually attack Scotland, but to kind of maintain a defence against Scottish invasion. Okay, and it's that kind of military skill that he was very much known for. And although he had, like I said earlier, his physical deformity with his curved spine, his intelligence on the battlefield, his ability to plan and be strategic was very, very good. And that was he was clearly quite an excellent thinker. So that's why we're studying it. It's because he's a local celebrity, as it were. It's a direct connection between us and a Shakespeare play that we wouldn't get with other plays. And the other reason I like this one is when you get into year 10, you'll study Macbeth. And Macbeth is, although it's a very different play in its style, there's very stark similarities between the way Richard goes about his uh, plot and his story, and how Macbeth goes about his plot. They're different kings, but they both kill their way to becoming king. Let's put it that way. And that means that by studying Richard now, it'll give you kind of an insight into the Shakespearean style that is kind of demonstrated in Macbeth. Macbeth is a later play than Richard, but the themes that Shakespeare explores are similar across the two plays. at the actual getting to know the basics of this play. Richard III is full of political manoeuvring. It's all about power, getting hold of power, and in this form of the crown, becoming king, and then basically the way that whole power struggle has evolved. So it's quite a complicated plot, but that makes it, I think, really enjoyable as we focus on one particular man's determined effort to become king. Where this all comes from is this, and this family tree. I'm going to show you a family tree here, and it's going to develop on the next slide as well. What this all comes from is this king here called Edward III. Edward III, as you can see, has 4 children. Sadly, Edward the Black died before he became king, and that single event, that single moment in history, the death of Edward the Black, meant that the natural and the planned transition of power from Edward III onto his child, onto his heirs, was kind of disrupted. Edward the Black did have a son, Richard II. Shakespeare wrote a play about him, by the way, as well. Shakespeare wrote plays about all the kings before Richard III. So if you do like the idea of a historical Shakespearean play, there's plenty of others you can read or enjoy as well. So Richard III becomes king, which is great for him. The problem is he's very young. He's barely out of short trousers. He's still a child when he becomes king. So that's happened before. Then it happened afterwards. This is not a new event, but what it does mean is that when he's king, he needs support, and that support came from his uncle, John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster. Now, as you can see, we've got these different colours on the screen here. We've got the blue crosses and the blue circles, the green crosses and the green circles. And what I'm trying to demonstrate is the way in which this level of kind of these brothers here, these 4 brothers, how they kind of split into 2 groups. Okay, so we've got this side here, which became known as the York family in the blue. So I'll just put that in the House of York, and the House of Lancaster, which I'm using green. Okay, now the colours don't mean anything. If anything, if there were going to be colours involved, House of York would be white because their logo was a white rose, and the Lancaster colour would be red because their logo was a red rose. And those have been adapted now and adopted, I should say, into, if you know anything about your cricket, then Lancashire Cricket Club have a red rose as their logo, and York Cricket Club has a white rose as theirs. So this idea of the roses, the red and the white roses, has continued into our present day. Although the actual ideas of York and Lancaster weren't really about the places, it's more to the family members. So what I'm trying to show you, this purple group of brothers are split into 2 halves. And with Richard II being quite a young king, heavily influenced by John of Gaunt, you can see that the power is, although it's being held by Richard II, there's a serious amount of influence coming from John of Gaunt. Now, when John of Gaunt dies, Richard does something that's quite unusual. He obviously becomes as king, but what he's done before he died is he starts a big argument with Henry, or who will become Henry IV. And Henry IV and Richard II just do not get on. So Henry, after his dad dies, he turns up in England with an army and basically claims the throne for himself. So we've got this kind of these cousins arguing and fighting and having a war against each other, and that's always going to be difficult for a family to kind of deal with. They're all closely related, yet they're having these huge battles against each other. Henry IV wins, and he then manages to successfully pass the crown on to his son Henry V, and when he dies, he managed to pass the crown on to Henry VI. And it's get into the Richard III storyline kind of for proper now. Okay, so here we have the second half of this family tree. And where the play starts, what we're going to read, the play starts with Edward IV becoming king. And what's happened to get him to be king? How Henry the sixth here is then replaced by Henry the fourth is because Edward the fourth. It's because Edward the fourth wins a battle, and the two leading Lancastrians are executed. So the king dies, and his son, who would have been heir, is also killed, which means the crown is passed on to Edward IV. And as you can look at this graphic here, there's very few of the House of Lancaster left. We've only got a few members of that family left. We've got Queen Margaret. There she is. Change this better colour because can't really see that yellow. There's Queen Margaret there, and we've got Lady Anne here, and that's all that's left. And from the House of York side of things, they're thinking that they're going to have a prosperous time now with peace and the sense of just establishing their dynasty for many generations to come. The problem is Richard, good old Richard the Duke of Gloucester, our Richard from Penrith, has got plans for his own ambitions to become king. So he has to kind of get this situation to orchestrate the situation so that he's able to become king. So the first thing he does is he kills or gets his brother George killed, and that happens very early in the play. That single event enables Richard, as you'll be able to see from the graphic here, he's now able to bypass there. He's now one step closer to becoming king. The actual heirs to the throne is the Prince Edward here, his brother, Richard, the Duke of York, and their sister Elizabeth. So those are the actual heirs to the throne. And what Richard's got to try and do is maneuver his way into a position where he can become king ahead of those three children. Okay, that's basically what he has to do. After getting rid of George, he needs to make his own position seem a little bit more credible. So this brings into focus Lady Anne. Lady Anne is or was married to the Lancastrian next king, and now she's a widow. She's able to marry again, and Richard identifies her as being someone who can make him look much more popular. So he identifies her as being a suitable wife to help him politically gain more popularity. So he convinces her to marry him. That's him getting support from the enemy. Okay, it makes him look good. It gives him a kind of balance, and it raises his status significantly. He's married now to the who would have been Queen of England, so he's got a kind of much more powerful claim now, or starting to emerge anyway. His next step is to get rid of King Edward IV. And that's what happens now. King Edward IV is ill. It's a really important detail in this plot, is that King Edward is not well, and because of the death of George and his poor health, he kind of has a shock, and he dies quite early on in the play. That then creates a vacuum, and that vacuum, Richard wants to fill that space with himself. He wants to kind of move into that position to become king ahead of Prince Edward. Now you'll notice on the graphics there's Prince Edward with brackets, the letter V. That's for Edward V. He does become king, but he never gets crowned. I don't think he kind of gets the title, but not the full big ceremony. And Richard is absolutely central in his devious plan to prevent Prince Edward actually having any kind of time on the throne. So the crown passes to Prince Edward, but because of his youth and he's so young, it's easy for Richard to gain influence over those two young princes, and he gets rid of them in an infamous scandal and murder which is known as the Princes in the Tower. Those two young boys were basically imprisoned in the Tower of London for their own protection, and they were never seen again. And archaeologists, I think, have found remains of two children. Could have been them. That's certainly the suspicion in the Tower of London in recent years. So you can see now, looking at the graphic, we are running out of characters. We've got Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who is still not king. We've got Queen Elizabeth, the widow, and we've got young Princess Elizabeth. Now, with those combinations of characters left on stage, it's inevitable. Richard becomes king. He manipulates various other characters to make sure that they decide or make the decision to crown him, and he accepts that proposal and becomes King Richard III. Now, that's kind of how he becomes king. He becomes king by essentially killing anyone between him and the throne and manipulating others around him. So it's a very devious kind of character that we're dealing with. But once he's king, he has the problem, like all kings, of then maintaining and establishing his rule. And as we know, he only manages 2 years as king, so it's very short term. The play, as I said, is all about him maintaining power, and the second phase, or the second half of the play, is about this particular pursuit of him maintaining power, and it all focuses on Elizabeth, as she is the only rightful heir left alive. You know, she is, if Richard wasn't in the picture, she would be queen. So there's a lot of pressure on Richard to kind of make Elizabeth's status, or to connect himself to her in some way. But as we know, he's already married to Lady Anne. He's used the marriage opportunity earlier in the play to get influence, but now he needs to kind of use the marriage play again. But he can't do that when he's already married. So Lady Anne dies, and that enables Richard to again look at getting married, and his target is his own niece Elizabeth, which is really quite unpleasant to think about because she's young and unmarried. The person who's kind of in control of her is her mother, Queen Elizabeth. Now, Queen Elizabeth is a very smart woman. She's seen what Richard has done to other members of her family. She's seen what he did to his first wife. She's seen what he did to his own brothers. And she's seen, most importantly, what he has done to her 2 sons. So she is not keen on the idea of her only remaining child marrying Richard. On top of this, we have Henry Richmond emerging, and he is he basically sees the throne of England as his. He's got a very strong claim to his own family background to be a rightful heir. So, but he can't do it because get it straight away because Richard's currently king. So he needs to kind of um, get rid of Richard, and because he's not Richard, Queen Elizabeth agrees to him marrying Princess Elizabeth. So we've now got Henry Richmond married to a genuine heir to the throne, and he then starts a war with Richard. Richard dies, gets buried in a car park in Leicester, and Henry Richmond becomes King of England. Now, what happens next with Henry, where this family tree would develop, is he is Henry VII. His son is Henry VIII, the one who had the 6 wives, and Henry VIII's daughter is Elizabeth I. So you can see that in terms of the history that Shakespeare was writing about, it's only a couple of generations before the actual time he was living in. So by having this play where we see this evil, horrible, monstrous, murdering King Richard III getting defeated by this heroic Henry Richmond, that makes the current queen, which is Elizabeth I in Shakespeare's time, seem to be like the rightful heir, seem to have a very positive bit of kind of advertising for her, really, a bit of PR for her status as Queen of England. And that's never a bad thing to make people think, oh, she's a good one. Thank goodness we don't have that horrible King Richard anymore. And that's the basics of Richard III. So what I suggest you now in 9 is that you take some notes. Obviously, we've got about another 20 minutes left of this lesson. So you want to go back over this, just rewind the video, take some notes down. If you want to use the bullet points that I've been talking you through, that's absolutely fine. Or if you're interested in doing a bit more research in Richard III yourself, you've got some time to do that as well. Okay, guys, so that's the end of this lesson. Take care, and I shall see you tomorrow.